Hi everyone, this is the Publishing's first live multicast AMA. I've got with me Mads Holmen CEO of Bibblio. How are you, Mads?
Very good indeed. Thanks for inviting.
No, thank you for joining. I really appreciate it. Sorry for the slight delay, everyone. It's just a bit of technical issues from my end, but it's a very exciting topic that we're going to be speaking about today. We're going to be speaking about how to improve your content experiences. But before we jump into that, I just wanted to go through some housekeeping and then I'll pass it over to Matt just to go and explain a bit about Bibblio, and we can kick through the agenda for today. So just in terms of housekeeping, in terms of how we're gonna set up AMA, it's in two parts. The first part is Matt obviously has a bit of his presentation where he's going to go through the key points of the agenda, so more around the state of the landscape today, how to improve your content experience for people, and etc. And then we're going to do a rapid fire question round where I've got quite a few questions from people who aren't able to attend today, and we'll go through their questions, and Mads will just go through and rapid fire and answer those questions. So just for people who are joining us, is there any questions or is there anything that you'd like to ask in advance? If you like to ask any questions, just go to the ask a question box, and while Mads is going through anything, feel free to post your questions there. But I'd like to pass it over to Mads now, just to start off with a brief background on Bibblio.
Perfect. Should I take it from here?
Yeah.
Perfect. So, I don't know, maybe try to mute yourself. It echoes a bit in. I think that's better. So, Bibblio essentially is a content recommendation service, and let me try to share a screen really quickly here. I don't know if you guys can see, but at the very heart of Bibblio is the idea of solving the discovery problem. As I normally say, for 500 years, publishing has really been about distribution, packaging information and getting it to consumers. But these days, we all have all the world's information in our pockets. So if you look across all of these sort of modern content platforms, they have a recommender engine at the very heart. And with that, they actually drive more than 10 billion hours a week. Now, the reality of web-based publishing is that most of our traffic come via some of those platforms. And often traffic doesn't come to our front page anymore. It comes via Google or Facebook, etc., and lands straight onto an article or a video. And so what we're really dealt with here is the idea of optimizing every single page and every single visit. Now, in a way, that means the real estate you have around your content, here identified in the right and the left, in the right and the bottom, are really the most effective tools we have for turning sort of a drive-by visitor into an engaged visitor, and later on maybe into a loyal or a paying customer. And at its heart, Bibblio basically gives websites and content platforms that functionality. We allow you to plug in your content really quickly. We index it and then start generating recommendations. Now, what is a good recommendation was one of the agenda points today. Now, there are kind of three pillars, and this goes across whatever algorithms. Place like Netflix have about 125 algorithms, but they basically fall into one of these three buckets. So first, we have content-based. You can essentially do an analysis of the content and find the most related content, or sometimes simply called similar content. Now, it's not just the content itself. There could be other signals in the content, such as the author or the time it was published or what category on the site it's part of. But that essentially all falls into what we call content-based recommendation. And I should say, for something like Google traffic that comes via a relevant search query, showing your most relevant content is actually at this point our best performing algorithms. But then the second layer, if you want it as layers, is the behavior-based models. So as soon as we start serving recommendations to people on a page, we can begin to see which articles actually get engaged with and how much they're getting engaged with. We can also begin to see if some articles are good at driving conversions, good at driving engagement, or simply just good at driving clicks, because those are not entirely the same thing. And I think that's one of the other things we can touch on today when we talk about sort of business models in the future. And then the last part is the user-based models, or often referred to as personalization. And personalization is certainly a powerful idea, but I would also say that personalization is an area where you can start to go very wrong. The first two are simpler in the sense that you're relying on some pretty robust data about the content or about the behavior you're seeing. The challenge in a personalized model is that we're beginning to now predict and edit for the user to show what essentially we think has a higher relevance to them. This can be very successful, but it also has the potential pitfalls of filter bubbles, beginning to show people more and more of what they've already clicked on, and hence leading to things like fatigue. One of the other common problems with these type of algorithms is they often tend to sort of flatten people a bit. And essentially what they end up doing is sort of giving an average of the most popular content. And that is not always a recipe. Is that it essentially relies on, if we're getting a visitor coming through from Facebook and we've never seen this person before, personalization is essentially a pipe dream. Facebook can do it because they're connected to 300 of our friends. They have all of our messages and most of our web browsing, etc. But to a normal publisher, that is not always the situation. And so it's also very important to build robust experiences that work without having that level of data on people. And then, needless to say, I wouldn't be here today if it didn't work. So overall, one of the things we look at, and the way you often benchmark recommended technologies, is unfortunately still on click rate. I am not one of those people that believe that success can just be measured in clicks, but it is a very good starting point. Overall, when we start to look at the actual engagement metrics, so things like bounce rate, dwell time, and pages per session, is really when we begin to get a view of increased user loyalty. And also, these metrics tend to be the most important these days for driving things like SEO ranking. Google is really a behavioral engine these days that look a lot at the average experience that a user have at a certain keyword in order to drive more traffic. So if we can improve our website metrics, we're essentially giving ourselves a boost. And overall, it leads to some more page views, more engagements, more of revenue in terms of various models. And I think that's one of the other discussion points today, is what is the future sort of business models for publishers? Largely, I would say we've seen three, maybe a bit more fall into it, but essentially one of them is the subscription model. If you look at companies like Business of Fashion or Economist that we work with, needless to say, they've had subscription models, and they are actually quite successful with those. So I definitely think if you have specialized content that people want, especially in a professional capacity, subscription is a very strong way to go. It also means that fundamentally your customers now your paying members, which I think has all sorts of positive ramifications for the way you build the business. A publisher that relies entirely on advertising revenue tends to make content decisions, design decisions, etc., based on that, rather than the user being the main customer and trying to deliver the best possible publishing experience for those users. In fact, often those two are a little bit contradictory. The second one we've seen is to kind of leverage a publishing brand to become the middle of an ecosystem. That can be extremely successful for building things like events. So TechCrunch is very, very famous for that, have now built TechCrunch Disrupt, which is actually sort of becoming their largest business. And we often now see that publishers are sort of branching out, and that also gives you the chance to become a brand studio. So a lot of publishers now have some kind of branded or sponsored content arm where they help relevant brands make content in their space, and sometimes help, drive attention to that. So I would certainly say the sort of publisher as the center of a vertical or an ecosystem is certainly also an interesting strategy. And then the last one is essentially affiliate or e-commerce. In some sectors, we see that e-commerce and affiliate is really now the majority of publishers' revenue. We have some clients in, as an example, the tech vertical that are driving 80-90% of their revenue from Amazon and other kind of e-commerce recommendations. Or they run their own store, which again allows you a higher margin. And with drop shipping, etc., it can be relatively easy these days to establish your own shop. That can, of course, also be internal on the site. Some people we work with are more in the area of business intelligence. So they might have a bunch of free blog or article content, but then they essentially also have paid for content, books, reports, other premium content. And we kind of count that a bit in the e-commerce sector, unless you sort of take out a subscription to get access to all of that. And that is essentially a segue into saying that what we often see is those three models are mixed. If you look at someone like Business of Fashion today, they actually run all three business models. They have a membership model, they have an education side where they sell access to courses, but then they also very much have their events and the specialist sort of intelligence unit around that, where they work closer with brands to do recruitment in particular, but also industry reports, etc. So last but not least, I thought I would show you one or two examples of Bibblio. So this is on National Geographic as an example, and this is Bibblio here on the side. I want to show another example here is Afar. It's a big US travel website, to the one of you who don't know. And if you go to the bottom here, that's essentially Bibblio. So it's an interesting point that in many places where Bibblio lives, it's impossible for the end user to essentially see that that's the case. We give our publishers the ability to completely white label and design their module. They can also use the raw API and build whatever experience they want. But even with our plug and play module, they can essentially just override the font and styling to make that look like their own site. And in this case, there's actually two modules. There's a module 4 and another. And those two modules can, or different modules on the page, can also have different functionalities. So you could choose to run one algorithm in one of them and run another algorithm in the other module, which is the case here. And then last but not least, wanted to just show another example. This is Suitcase magazine, big fancy travel magazine in London. And as you'll see here, there's this recommendations you may also like. These are also built by Bibblio. This is actually another pre-built Bibblio module that have just been styled to their own content and own design. And again, importantly enough, that is not the only thing that they produce and promote on the page. So I think one of the things we always advocate is essentially having a conversation about what are the different things that we put on every page to drive our business. In this case, subscription is very important for them. Their city guides are extremely important for them. Of course, driving followers, being able to contact those people again is very important for them. And so is their bundles, because that's really their most premium content and where they often have partnerships. So I think this is just an example of what a good page could look like. Actually, they also, if you saw the little thing that come up here, that's actually another technology, not Bibblio. But I would say we always welcome that publishers have various types of experiences. Of course, there is an overkill at some point, but I think if you can essentially produce different types of experiences that allows a user to make a conscious choice about how they would like to continue their experience, that is, in my opinion, the best way to get most out of every page view. And so I think with that, let's conclude the sort of initial intro. Let's see if I can actually close that and get back. And let's start diving into the questions.
Thanks so much for the presentation, Mads. It was pretty good, and gave a good overview of Bibblio and the state of things. So we got one question from Alex Young, and he said, "Can artificial intelligence provide insights?" What are your thoughts on that?
I think that is a very good first question, to be honest. I think it definitely, you can say at its heart, what AI really does well is to take a large amount of data and begin to find patterns in that. That is actually the one and only thing that AI is really good at. That's, of course, not the same as being able to provide insights. But I think one of the most fascinating areas we are seeing at the moment is that publishers have had a lot of user data, Google Analytics, Chartbeat, etc., but they haven't had a lot of actionable insights. What content should I make more of? What are the keywords or topics that my audience engages most with? Some of the companies are beginning to move in that direction, but I think it's fair to say at this point, publishers have had a lot of data, but not necessarily a lot of actionable insights. And so I think one area of focus for AI is essentially how you detect a lot of these patterns, but how you output that as actionable insight. To us, that, as an example, and one of the things we're building out at the moment is this idea of a sort of editor's dashboard, where you can get a really quick snapshot of what are the topics and articles on my site that are actually driving the highest engagement. One of the things we see quite often is that people have a list of, say, like popular content, but then what you realize is that list is generated based on what articles have the most clicks in the last 48 hours. And then actually you realize that most of the articles that are in that box are articles that they've put on Facebook. And because they put them on Facebook, they got a lot of clicks. And now they're the most popular, so we're in the most popular, so they get more clicks. And so one of the most important things I think that AI, if it's done well, can do is to give unbiased insight. Insight that isn't actually generated by our own actions, but by quietly observing the patterns of what users do on the site. To give an idea, one of the most fascinating areas for me about AI at the moment is things like cybersecurity, where AI is being deployed to essentially detect unnormal patterns. So instead of trying to sort of build this whole elaborate security system, you essentially build a system that just tries to spot if anything not normal is going on in your infrastructure, and then alert a security person to that. That is an immediately actionable insight, right? It's a way of saying, actually, this is happening right now. We think you checked it, everything's fine. you could almost imagine something in pop. You could have an AI that can essentially be sort of an editor's assistant, keeps a track of what's going on in the world, what's happening on Twitter and Reddit and whatever. Is there anything kicking off in our world that we should be covering right now? That's one area where I think AI could be and sort of being built out to be very useful.
What about the natural language processing aspect? I mean, from the slides that you shared, it mostly seems that the recommendations come from analytics. But is there not natural language processing or any of the other technologies around AI that you guys are factoring in or you're going to be incorporating?
Yes, so you would use natural language processing in order to be able to do that. And so, yes, natural language processing is one of the components that sort of allows you to generate that data for every piece of content. But it's essentially when you begin to overlay that contextual information with the user data, the user behavior that you're seeing, that I think you can begin to really generate actionable insights.
And I think over time, more of that's going to happen and it's going to become more intelligent. So we need to do more of that contextualization, which is...
Yeah, you can say places like YouTube already have a system that where their YouTube creators can essentially go in and see what things are trending on Google at the moment, etc., that they might want to make videos about.
Even Spotify,
so in a way, YouTube is already helping their creators trying to create better content, essentially.
They do, but even like Spotify has, and to some extent, Spotify is a bit more advanced in their recommendations. But with AI, what I'm noticing a lot of news aggregators are doing is they have that feedback loop where it's not reliant on a person or another endpoint. It self-learns and does it that way. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, so one area where I think that's been deployed really well actually is in the area of subscription. So we work with a couple of publishers, and I'm aware of a couple of publishers apart from that who've deployed systems that when they launch an article, this is for publishers who sort of have some of their content behind a paywall and some of it is free. What you begin to detect essentially is if some articles are great at driving conversion. So as an example, the largest Danish newspaper now kind of runs this model where the AI actually detects whether articles should be behind the paywall or not behind the paywall. So you're making a dynamic decision on the status of each article. One of the really important things about that is that there's not always a connection between the articles that get most clicks and the articles that users would actually pay to access. So what the system will essentially do is kind of test the same article both as sort of behind the paywall and not behind the paywall. And if it begins to see that article is being successful at being behind the paywall, it will essentially carry on with that article behind the paywall. But what it allows you to do is sort of give access to a lot of your popular content for free without actually really harming your conversion or your subscription numbers. Because what often happens is that those most clicked articles are sort of the general popular stuff. And that's actually the stuff that people want to pay for. It's not the articles that really convert. Our joke is that everybody clicks on articles with Kim Kardashian and Trump, right? But no one wants to pay for it.
Yeah.
So you often see that it's the more specialized content that actually sort of deserves having that paywall sort of sign on.
I think you make a really good point. Like you need to know which phase of that content, the content funnel, your news pieces are, in order to then determine whether or not it's worth making it a paywall or making it free access. I think that makes total sense.
Yeah, I think one of the ways, people have often done this, you get 3 articles or 5 articles and then you get the paywall growing. But I think actually a more preferential strategy is to have sort of a differentiated paywall where some users can access more content before they have to pay, or some content can only be accessed if you're paying, rather than sort of say you have 3 articles every month and then people can cheat that by opening up a new browser or deleting their cookies, or in a way, it's not a very solid model. I think it's a more solid model to essentially have some content that is not available unless you pay, and other content that is always available and can be shared and can drive audience.
That makes sense. Yeah, that's cool. Just for those who are already here and attending, feel free to post any questions, or if you want to jump in, I've invited everyone to jump in to ask the question via video. But let's move on with the other questions if anyone else doesn't have any questions. This topic's all about providing content experience. So I know you've provided us the pillars, but what do you define as the perfect content experience?
Yeah, I guess that's a good question too, isn't it? I would rather say what we're seeing a lot at the moment is that publishers are converting over to a feed-based model. So essentially sort of copying an Instagram or Facebook and all of these other platforms that now have. That is potentially very powerful because it gives the next article to the user in that kind of lean back scroll experience. The danger is if you're not as good at doing it as Facebook and Instagram is, it can also be quite dangerous because you're making that decision for the user, right, about the next article they should see. I won't name any names, but we had a meeting with a big football publisher last week, and they've just changed over to a feed, and they showed us their site. And there was an article about Jose Mourinho talking about Paul Pogba in football ahead of the World Cup. And the next article was essentially the next article that had been published, because at the moment it was just doing it in chronological order. But that next article was about the Indian Football Association, right? And the assumption is very few people who are reading about France and Manchester United will be particularly interested in the Indian Football Association. So you can say there's a concept called fault-tolerant design. And the problem is when we make decisions for people like that, we also carry the fault on us. If we got it wrong, users will attribute that to us, as opposed to if you'd given them 10 different options and they had chosen one of them. So one of the challenges of changing to this feed style is essentially getting that right. And that comes back to a recommender engine again, of course. The other one that I think, is still happening around the world, really. And I sort of started saying this to people 10 years ago, but it's still happening, is video. Video is still, it's difficult for publishers, and it's definitely not something you should just jump into just for the sake of doing it. But I think as publishers in the future, we have to think about ourselves as content creators in whatever format our audience wants to consume that. So whether that's podcast or written word, I think the right story should be told in the right format. So I would really say it's when all of those things come together, when content is told in the right format, with the right type of experience around it. And then, I really should say too, and without too many things distracting from that experience. We often there's a little simple Google speed test you can run on your site. It's just called Google Speed Test. And it basically shows how long it goes to take your page, to load your page on a 3G internet. And then it sort of estimates how many % of your users you due to the loading time. And, I still experience this quite often when you click on a link to an article in whatever social platform, that article page basically crashes your browser, right? And you can never get to that article. That is definitely, so maybe that's the reverse definition, is sort of don't do anything that ruins the content experience. It's actually more the status quo than sort of chasing the best possible user experience. I think very few publishers are really approaching an ideal user experience. I think we're still trying to iron out the things that are detracting from sort of standard user experience.
There's a lot of questions I have in that, but let's go through the questions that everyone else has posted first, and then I'll ask my questions after. The second question I have is what data signals you should be paying attention to when you're monitoring content performance and why? I know you went through some of the metrics already, but just in general again, just for that person.
Yeah, no, definitely. You can say it varies a little bit based on the business model, right? If it's a fully ad-funded site, full page views are important, right? That's directly to our revenue. So the click rates and how we, pages per session, how good we are at converting that first sort of landing page into a content experience. We work with a lot of sites that are, they get 1.2, 1.3% pages per session, right? So 70, 80% of users that land on a page disappear on that page. And so I think capturing people's attention in a way that isn't too intrusive, but sort of gets them hooked into that experience is quite important. Now, one of the best things you can look at, in my opinion, is bounce rate, because bounce rate really sums up all the things that might sort of mean that person didn't go beyond that first page. And that really unites design, experience, content, all into one. That's also why it can be quite difficult, because which thing do you work on? And that's where good analytics come in, right? If we can begin to see that actually only 30% of people get to the bottom of the page, 70, 80% of people don't get halfway through the article, then we need to think about the type of content we're making. And also where we're getting our audience from, right? If a lot of our audience is coming from Facebook ads, etc., this is often where you see that type of behavior, where people saw an exciting sort of thumbnail image or title and they clicked on it, but then as soon as they landed on the page, they realized that this was really crap, right? This is a problem with a lot of the clickbaity traffic, is that it sort of works when you measure it on a click rate, but when you measure it on an engagement level, it's really horrendous, and it pulls down the whole site. So what we see, unfortunately, is that sites that are great at driving Facebook traffic is often not very good at driving Google traffic. And it actually is the thing that sort of regulates itself. If you're driving a lot of sort of casual Facebook traffic, you're actually sort of harming your own website metrics, which means that Google will send you less traffic because they don't think your site is particularly good. So there's sort of a balancing act. I always advocate people to go for the longer term. Google and search has proven a much more stable model than social traffic. It's also much easier to monetize search traffic over social traffic. Social traffic tends to be very fickle, not very low. So unless you're literally trying to drive an ad campaign and hit a certain amount of page views, I think social traffic is one of the challenges that we have at the moment. It's sort of this false sense of satisfaction, right? Our audience is growing, but actually it's not really ours. It's just an audience we're borrowing from today's social platform. And when they change their algorithm next time, we're going to be, Yeah,
they might not be there tomorrow if something changes. But Mads, how you said around like unqualified traffic coming to your website, is there any way that you can go into Bibblio and then configure the settings to put parameters, throttles, for example, like if the user per session is this much from this source, then ignore that as part of the content recommendations that you're showing for your users. Is there something that you can do like that to tinker so that it does improve the on-site engagement?
Yes. So as I said, across those sort of core metrics, bounce rate, pages per session, and dwell time, typically, if you're not doing anything advanced at all, and you sort of deploy full-on recommender platform, you could probably lift site engagement with 7 to 10%. If you're already doing relatively well, i.e. you have a couple of modules already with the most popular or recent and related, and you start to run a smart system that does machine learning to optimize that, you can probably lift that number with 3 to 5%. Now, that may not sound like huge, but if you could drive 10% more engagement from the same audience and the same content, that's by far the cheapest thing most publishers can do. You know, getting 10% more traffic or engagement by writing better content or redesigning the site or doing better in social strategy is often quite harder. So we often say that good recommendations on every page actually tends to be the lowest hanging fruit. You know, it tends to be the thing where people probably haven't done something very advanced. There's probably some module in place that we put in place when we first designed the site or built the site. It's been sitting there for 3 years, but most of what we see is these kind of static data models where it finds articles of the same topic, or it shows the most recent articles in that category, etc. And while those can be good, that is not the only module you should have on the page, in my opinion.
Understood, yeah. So the next question that I have is, how did you come up with a formula for people, the recommendations?
One more time, how we come up with?
How did you come with that formula for putting together user metrics, behavior metrics, and then the traffic metrics? How did you come up with that formula?
So a lot of it is actually from research in the field. There's been pretty sort of significant research academic in the recommender system space in the last 13, 14 years. There's actually a conference every year called REXIS, Recommender Systems. It's a fairly geeky crowd that get together and discuss this. I think one of the things that, two things we've observed. That community has been very good at driving these sort of time optimization algorithms. So look at Facebook and Netflix and all of those. They've been extremely successful in increasing the user engagement and user loyalty. What I think they've been less good at up until now is to deliver a good human experience. So Facebook is very effective in getting you to spend a lot of time on Facebook, but it's not very good necessarily at knowing if you're happy with the time you're spending, right? Same with Netflix. I might stay up till 3 o'clock in the morning watching TV series because they're great at recommending, but is that actually going to make me happier about it? Or is it going to start to be a problem because I have to get up at 7? You know, so I think the era we're going into now is an era where recommender systems are moving from being optimization engine to actually being more kind of a human assistant, something that is aware of our goals and our needs, and it tries to deliver a more balanced experience. Sometimes we like to do stuff, right? One of the greatest examples I have is, I won't name any names, but we did an event together with a food recommendation platform, so those delivery services. And they rolled out a new personalized algorithm. And what basically happened was that as a result of that, well, as a result of McDonald's being quite popular, they get a lot of orders. Actually, people know what to expect. So McDonald's get pretty good ratings. When they deployed the new system, most people were being recommended McDonald's, right? But they started getting a lot of emails because actually people don't want McDonald's as a recommendation, right? It's sort of, are you trying to get me to eat junk food? So it's one of those where if you follow the statistics, it was an absolute recommendation. You know, the algorithm was working exactly like it should. But it's not very aspirational to a human to be recommended McDonald's, right? Nothing wrong with McDonald's, but it's just not what I would like to do. It's a bit like buying a food magazine and the first ad is McDonald's, right? It's like, that's not what I was expecting. I think Spotify has done some really exciting work in this area and sort of figuring out your recommendations based on, say, where you are. So are you in your car, or are you at home, or are you in the gym? Actually could have a very significant impact on what type of music you want to be recommended. And that's an example of a system that is suddenly aware of one of the finer details of your life, right? It doesn't know how you feel, but actually they've done that too, right? By having playlists based on different moods. And so you can sort of begin as a user to actually tell the system what you're looking for. And I think one of the emerging areas in this whole recommender space is what we call HCI, so human-computer interaction. So instead of a black box, think of the recommender system much more as an assistant, something you can speak to, not quite literally speak to yet, but soon. In some platforms you can. But I think definitely that's the future, is sort of systems that can listen to us and give us more agency. I think we've seen some very compelling research that if you give two users the same experience, but one of them is an experience where they're controlling the wheel, users prefer that experience. Users are actually happier when they have transparency and agency. We don't really like and trust these black boxes.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt, so if the next question is, if a company's website has a big churn rate, what strategies are out there to prevail over this issue?
Sorry, one more time. It was just a bit unclear.
I'll just say one more time. If a company's website has a big churn rate, what strategies are out there to prevail over this issue?
That's not a small question, I should say, but I would say often it actually just starts with knowing what's wrong. In particular, I can say we've done this ourselves with Bibblio, is just paid a couple of people. You can go to Fiverr or other websites, essentially pay someone $5 or $10 to go and review your website, and you can set them a little task. So as an example, go and say, go and complete this task, but that's not really so much that's just churn on our normal traffic, right? Realizing that people can't navigate our site, they can't find the content, or they don't know what to do with it. You can also do very good kind of mouse tracking, page tracking to look at hotspots on the site, etc. Where do people go? Where do people click? This could be some of the most informative stuff early days. On the churn rate itself, say you have paying subscribers and you have a lot of people who don't renew that. Net Promoter Score has proven its effect. If you have a high Net Promoter Score, that's certainly a very good proxy for having a low churn rate. A couple of publishers we work with have built a really exciting system where it essentially looks at the user's engagement on the site. So typically, how often do they go there? How long do they spend? And how many articles have they read in different subjects? And based on that, you attribute the user a score. And if the score gets too low, essentially someone from the customer service team will reach out to that user, because you assume that user is actually in the risk of leaving. So I think publishers can be a lot more, and platforms in general can be a lot more proactive about trying to protect their customers. As one newspaper executive said to me not too long ago, until recently, the only time of year where we've communicated with our customers was when we sent them an invoice, right? We didn't speak to them all year, and then we sent them a bill, And so I think what publishing and media is really learning from other industries now is that you have to work a lot harder to keep a customer happy, right? The content is not enough. So content is great, and content is a great utility, but it's not the same as me having a great experience.
Absolutely, I 100% agree. Like, even as I'm trying to build my subscription, service is absolutely a key factor. So 100%. For the next question, this one's a big question. It's a broad question. So, what do you need to do to build and maintain a successful, loyal audience?
Yeah, that's not the $1 billion question, but the $200 billion question. According to Apple, you have to get Oprah Winfrey and make some content with her. I don't think there's a simple answer to that, right? But I think it's a combination of things. I think the best platforms like Spotify now, are basically realizing that the reason people pay for Spotify is the combination of utility and experience. So utility is I have all the music available, and that's super helpful. And that means that Spotify is a good proposition compared to, say, radio or other things. But what they also realized is that having a really nice app, making it really easy to have playlists and share playlists and discover new music and all of those things is actually what keeps people paying. And then I think just to sort of stay in the Spotify world, one of the things they've done best is create a free product that's just good enough that I know exactly why I want the premium one, right? You can still have all the music, but you realize that having ads in between your music is actually quite annoying. The fact that you can only play your playlists when you're online, you can't download and listen to it offline. They found just the right pain points. And actually, that's quite an important point, is that I think one of the things that the news industry kind of did wrong in the beginning was to just give all the content away, right? But not really consider the experience around that people might want to pay for. You know, why do people go in and pay $150 for a pair of Nike when you could get a perfectly fine pair of sneakers for $40, right? It's because the packaging, because it makes me feel good about myself, because it was a nice experience. I don't actually think industries are that different, that if we want to appeal to consumers, we've got to tick those boxes. We've got to have some utility value. We've got to have something that they want. And then we've got to build some aspiration on top of that. You know, I could be a better person. I could be better looking. I could be more the kind of person I want to be. That's essentially what people are willing to pay a premium for, in my experience.
Yeah, unfortunately, though, Spotify isn't still profitable yet, which even though they have all this good user experience and they've refined their model, it still needs profitable as well. So
yeah, and I think the thing that's working best for publishers and media at the moment is actually a mixed model, right? Where you have membership base, you run some advertising, but then you also do a bit of e-commerce or affiliate or events, etc. And actually you build a quite sort of varied business model. One of the benefits of that is that it also gives you more resilience, right? You're not depending on one revenue stream. So I would say definitely our most successful publishers have found a way to get beyond just sort of programmatic advertising. I don't think being a purely programmatic ad-driven publisher in the future is going to be a very fun place to be.
publishers, you said that you have publishers who have multiple models that are feeding their recommendations. How can they manage all those different models within the recommendation engine?
One more time. I'm sorry, the end of it was a bit.
Sorry, I'm just saying that with the publishers that have multiple models, how does that all the data from those different models fit into Bibblio? How can they use multiple models?
So interestingly, what we see is that better engagement tends to drive all the different business models. So as you get a more loyal audience, they start to trust you for things, and so they start to buy stuff, or they sign up, or they give you their email. So actually, sort of turning that passive audience into more of an active audience is often the first step. And so it's kind of a step-by-step where you have to first build a loyal audience base that you can essentially sell stuff to. You sort of get the right to sell them stuff over time. I think we've seen this a lot with people like Business of Fashion, right? They're now perceived to be the natural place if you're in the fashion industry. So if you want to get a new job, that's probably where you go to look for a job. So I think owning your vertical, being the natural center of gravity in your vertical is really sort of the thing publishers should aim for. I think that can be much more valuable than having a big varied audience. as I said, the publishers we have that are doing best are the publishers who know who their audience is, and they focus on serving them with multiple different models, right? So I think that's an insight in a way to what we're seeing that is successful. I think the opposite is true as well, that publishers rely a lot on social traffic and a lot on programmatic advertising are certainly in trouble.
Understand.
You can sort of say, unless you can out Facebook, right? Then you can question if you want to be in that industry.
Cool. Mads, I've got two more questions, and I realize that we're already at the clock on the dot, but I've got two more questions, and then that's pretty much it. So the first one is what were the challenges when you saw that when developing Bibblio?
That's a good question. Well, maybe ask you back when in challenges with Bibblio. What do you mean?
Challenges when you're building out Bibblio to make it what it is today.
Oh, well, on the company side itself, I should say building the technology has been pretty hard. I can't build that myself, but the people that have been working on it will tell you that it's pretty difficult. In particular, you have all these amazing academic papers, you have all these amazing recommendation models, but then when you actually try to implement nothing of it works the way that they say it's going to work. Right? So translating algorithms into production software is definitely not a direct translation. So that's been one certain. It's taken us 2 years to build out the platform. The other thing I would say is in the beginning, publishers don't have a ton of money. Right? We're not like the pharmaceutical industry or whatever, where money is flowing around. So you got to really justify the product, right? You got to show people that it's worth it, because people have to choose between different things. They don't have money for everything that they want. So earning your place in that is certainly the second challenge. And I would say related to that, the third challenge was when we first launched the product. You built this amazing recommendation system, you think, except it doesn't live on anybody's website yet. And so convincing those first 10 people that you could live on their website is probably the hardest thing I've ever done. I think, because in B2B enterprise, everybody wants to see 5 case studies, right? And so until you've got those 5, you just have to find some people who, trust you and are willing to take a chance. So I would say, actually, strange enough, it was harder to get to 10 clients than to get from 10 to 100. It actually took longer to get from 0 to 10 than from 10 to 100.
Absolutely. Once I see the proof of concept, then it just flourishes. So yeah, 100%. It's always
it kind of is. I sometimes compare it to starting an avalanche, right? Once you see the avalanche at the bottom of the mountain, it's all crazy and scary. But how do you start it? How do you get some snow rolling down the hill so that it begins to pick up momentum? So I think we kind of saw it a bit. How do you start an avalanche in a way? How do you start a momentum that's going to begin to carry itself?
I'm very happy to see that you guys are where you are today. So that's very awesome. You guys persevered and went through it.
Yeah, it's a growing snowball rolling down the hill. I don't know if it's quite an avalanche yet, but at least the snowball is rolling, and it's building up a bit of size.
Yeah, absolutely. Mads, so does anyone compare Bibblio to native advertising platforms like Outbrain, and how do you explain the difference to them, whoever is pitching?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Outbrain and Bibblio makes their money off putting ads on the site, right? That people click on, get paid when they use it. Bibblio doesn't carry ads inside of the recommendations. We recommend people's own content. And while you can also do that with Outbrain and Taboola, you can't do that without having the ads on the page. And so we're essentially pitching it like internal recommendations versus external recommendations, or really a recommendation platform as opposed to an ad network. Because of the way Outbrain and Taboola calculates these things, it also gets served by an ad server, which means that it's not really native to the page that it lives on. And that has some downsides too, right? It's very easy to spot that this is not part of the page and that it's essentially served by Outbrain or Taboola. So yes, the biggest difference is we won't give a publisher a check every month just for sticking a module to the page. The good part is you get to keep all your users and all your revenue. You know, as I often say to people, when something is free and you get a check every month, it normally means someone else could make more money off the same thing, right? So I often try to remind publishers that if they create a lot of content and they spend a lot of time and resource getting people to their site, is it really their business model to be paid 3 or 4 cents to send people away from their site again? You know, to use a very bad Danish analogy, in Danish there's a sort of a metaphor saying it's the peeing in your pants strategy, right? It gets warm for a little bit, but it's not a very long-term solution. So I think in some ways Taboola and Outbrain have been great in terms of helping publishers make some money, but I think publishers should also be aware that it is a short-term solution. I don't think it's something you want to build your future around.
I mean, I think a lot of people use it for amplification mostly, but yeah, everyone has their own opinion to
Exactly, and you can say one of the other things you can do with Bibblio is you can begin to promote and drive your own sponsored content and branded content on your own site, right? So instead of then sending people out of your site, you can actually partner with brands to create brand content, and you can have a module on your site that promotes and sort of brands your own sponsored content and branded content. But suddenly you don't have to, you know, lose 60% of the money. You get to keep all the money. So I think Bibblio is sort of a way of beginning to build out those things, but in a way where you as a publisher can retain all the control.
Good, Mads. Mads, final comments to you. The questions are done from my end. Final comments to you. What would you like to finish? How would you like to finish off?
How I would like to finish off?
Yeah, what's the final words? Your final words.
Well, so I think what we're trying to promote really is that for the last 10 years, advertising has sort of dominated the internet, right? And as a result of that, publishing has been decimated. You know, staff, newsrooms everywhere, journalists are all complaining that it's impossible to make money. But what's actually beginning to happen, I think, is that the pendulum is swinging the other way. You know, consumers have got used to paying for Netflix and Spotify. And so this whole idea of paying for content is not actually as strange as it was 5 or 10 years ago. I think it's now on publishers to begin to adapt and begin to deliver a better experience to users that they're also willing to pay for. I think it's a bit of a chicken and egg, where until you create a product that's worth paying for, you can't expect anyone to pay for it. So something has to go first. And I think in particular, we're seeing it in verticals, you know, food, travel, politics, that users are actually putting up their credit card. They're actually willing to pay. You know, in most countries now, take the Correspondent in Netherlands, take Die Republik in Germany. You know, in most countries now, there are new successful publishers that have, in the last 3 to 5 years, launched with subscription models that are profitable. They've raised quite a lot of money, and they're doing really well. So I think one of our most important messages to the world right now is that it really can be done. You know, it's not impossible to build a quality publishing business. But you can't do both. You know, you can't build a 200 million Facebook audience and also build the best content in the world at the same time. I think as a publisher in the future, you have to choose if you're in the entertainment game or you're in the knowledge game. I think one of the problems of traditional newspapers at the moment is they sort of try to be both. And it means they're really not the best at anything, right? And that package used to work when I got it through my letterbox in the morning on Saturday, and I had sport for, you know, the one part of the family and fashion for the other part of the family. But that doesn't really translate very well into a digital world, right? Because everybody can find what they want all the time. So I think publishers have to make the best possible content they can and deliver the best possible experience that they can. And if they chose the right area, there will be a group of people who are willing to pay for that and keep you alive.
Well, I'm all for subscriptions, so quality content for me. Mads, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you jumping on and going through this AMA. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. For everyone, just to know, there's going to be the recorded video on the stateofdigitalpublishing.com. All you have to do is just, for those who, yeah, you can just access it from there, and it's also on Facebook Live, so you can access it at any time. And for people who are just watching this, who have registered after the recording, or you feel free to jump on for other articles, and feel free to ask me or Mads any questions. I'm happy to refer you to Mads for any questions that you have on content recommendations. So thanks, Mads. I'll speak to you soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for today.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Guys.